Blumenthal, and I'm honored to serve as your 2025 BCAR Board President. On behalf of the Bucks County Association of Realtors, I'd like to welcome you to this special webinar on the topic that's crucial to all of our members, our region, and our future. There's no secret to realtors that low inventory and high prices are making homeownership increasingly out of reach for workers, for families, and young adults here in Bucks County. We see it in the market each and every day, and it's making it harder for seniors to downsize and remain in the communities that they love too. Today, we're joined by two experts who will help us better understand why increasing attainable and workforce housing options is so vital to the future of our economy and our communities. State Representative Jim Prokopiak won a special election in February of 2024 to represent the 140th Legislative District in Bucks County. An attorney by trade, Representative Prokopiak brings a wealth of public service experience, having served on the Falls Township Board of Supervisor and as a member of the Pennsbury School District Board. Evan Stone is the Executive Director of the Bucks County Planning Commission, where he leads a staff of 24 planning professionals with more than 33 years of experience in landscape architectural planning, design, and land development. Evan brings both a practical and policy-focused perspective to countrywide planning efforts. And finally, we're pleased to introduce our own Jamie Ridge, CEO of the Suburban Realtors Alliance, who's going to serve as today's moderator. Jamie directs the Alliance's political, legislative, and public relations initiatives, and previously worked in Philadelphia as Regional Director of Public Affairs for Fannie Mae. He's got a great staff with Erin and Pete who are here to help today. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us today. We're looking forward to a great discussion. Jamie, take it away.
Thank you, Frank, and good afternoon, everyone. As Frank mentioned, I'm Jamie Ridge, CEO of the Suburban Realtors Alliance, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. So just a few quick housekeeping notes before we begin. This session will be recorded and will be available in the days to come. We'll have a section at the end of today's webinar dedicated to audience questions. So if you have a question about something we covered during the discussion, please feel free to add it to the chat at any time, and we'll do our best to address it during the Q&A portion. So this is an issue that we at the SRA have been focused on for several years as housing inventory has declined and prices have continued to rise. I'm excited that we have these two experts with us today who can help us better understand why this issue is so important to Bucks County and the region and what we might do about it. To start, let's look at where we stand in the market right now. At the end of September, there were 843 active residential listings in Bucks County. That's just 1.6 months of inventory, which indicates a very strong seller's market. 6 months of inventory is considered balanced, meaning neither buyers nor sellers have much of an advantage. And compared to last year, inventory is down about 18%. The median sold price at the end of last month was $516,000. That's up from $460,000 last year, an increase of about 12%, well beyond the rise of inflation. To afford a home at that price, a buyer would need an annual income of roughly $150,000, assuming a 10% down payment and a 6% interest rate. But the median household income in Bucks County is only about $112,000. Which would support a home purchase of around $330,000. And there just aren't many homes available at that price point. In fact, only 82 of the 843 homes listed earlier this month would be considered affordable for families earning the median income. This is the challenge we're talking about today. Many of the people who work in Bucks County, teachers, nurses, police officers, firefighters, and those in service and construction industries simply can't afford to live here. So Representative Prokopiak, you bring a valuable mix of local and state level experience to this issue. As a former Falls Township supervisor, you've seen firsthand many of the challenges communities face when trying to make housing more attainable. And as a state legislator, you've already heard directly from constituents struggling with affordability. That brings us to House Bill 529. the legislation that you've introduced to help address the inventory issue. So the question is, what inspired you to introduce HB 529, and how does it aim to support attainable housing efforts at the municipal level? And can you walk us through how the bill provides zoning incentives and promotes smart growth principles?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for the question, and thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone who's participating. So clearly, I represent a district in Lower Bucks County that is, the home of Levittown and Fairless Hills, which were some of the first really attainable housing for workers in this country. Um, a place where, a steel worker could buy a house for $95 down and $95 a month or something around that. And for years and generations, it has been a place where people who are just starting out, who aren't making a lot of money, your teachers, your firefighters, your electricians, can buy a house and begin their American dream. And within the last, since 2017, we've seen an explosion in the prices, not just all over Bucks, but especially here in Levittown. I had a policy hearing in September talking about attainable housing, and from 2017 to now, the average sales price of a Levittown house has doubled. It's over doubled. And that has put a strain on many of our families. It has also led to seniors staying in their homes a lot longer than they would normally do that because there's no place for them to go because of the high cost of housing. So, so when we look at that here in Lower Bucks and all over Bucks, and frankly all over the Southeast and many parts of our state, we need to do something about it. However, of course, we have powerful competing interests because obviously Pennsylvania is a very pro-local control state, and our township supervisors and our borough councils want to ensure that they have the final say in what's going on in their communities, which can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on where you are in that situation. But it certainly allows for NIMBYism to take a very large impediment to many of the projects that would actually help alleviate these problems. So knowing that, certainly, and there's been bills in the past that have really focused on taking local control away from those municipalities and placing it into, and other states have done that. But frankly, I don't believe there's an appetite here in Pennsylvania for that at this time. So we're not going to see what they've done in Florida or what they've done in California necessarily be successful here. Certainly the Township Supervisors Association, the Boroughs Association would be against that, and many other citizens groups because, so there's a real problem, and it's a complicated problem to address, and it's not just going to be a simple solution. So as opposed to mandating something to municipalities, I prefer to look at something that is more of a carrot approach where we sit there and we say, how do we work with local communities and local electeds to ensure that we're providing for what our constituents need, but also giving them the ability to still have that local control? And that's where 529 comes into fray. It's based on a bill similar to what's in Massachusetts that basically says that one of the biggest things that we hear from local elected officials always is that, every new development is going to cost them more money, and they don't see the benefit of it. And so one of the things we want to sit there and say is this bill would incentivize monetarily municipalities to come up with smart zoning that ultimately will help them alleviate the housing crisis that we have for those people who are basically from 75% to 100% of AGI, but still give them that control over what they're doing. Still give them that control over, what is going in there, the placement of it, and the density of it. Ultimately, we want to create more housing units, but in areas that communities can agree are the best places for those. And that's really where 529 comes from.
Terrific. Thanks, Representative. That's a great overview. And Evan, let's bring you into the conversation. So as Executive Director of the Bucks County Planning Commission, you and your organization are often at the forefront of these discussions. Can you tell us a little more about the role of the Planning Commission in Bucks County and how your team works with local municipalities on issues like housing and land use?
Certainly. First and foremost, thank you to everyone for joining us today. I appreciate everybody's time and being here. As for the Planning Commission, we essentially have both what I call a statutory role as well as a consulting role. And our statutory responsibility is that we're responsible for reviewing all major subdivision and land development applications that are proposed in the county. In addition to that, we look at sanitary sewer planning modules. We also look at Act 537 sewer plan matters as well. We are also responsible for the county's household hazardous waste. We're responsible for the county's solid waste management plan, hazard mitigation plan, the county's comprehensive plan. There's a lot of things that roll up under our umbrella. So in addition to what we have to do statutorily, we also provide consulting services to our municipalities. And we work on a fee-for-service basis, and we help them with their comprehensive plans and zoning rewrites as examples of the work that we do. And many of those conversations lately have come back to the notion of affordable housing. And I think both you, Jamie, and Representative Prokopiak really framed the matter and the issue perfectly. It's exactly the story that we're telling. And so that's one of the ways that we can engage with the county and our municipalities. We are in the process of creating a housing dashboard, for instance, and we're looking to roll that out in the beginning of November. And it will give you a lot of facts and figures on housing and demographics in the county to help illustrate the problems of affordability. I could get on my soapbox here, but I'll turn it back to you, Jamie.
Okay, so I do have a follow-up along the same lines, Evan. How would you describe the current state of attainable housing and workforce housing in Bucks County, and where do you see the biggest gaps that are kind of resisting any fix so far?
Yeah, and I think there's two things. I can go back to the county's 2011 comprehensive plan, and they talked about this notion of brain drain and young professionals leaving the county. And part of that reasoning was because even back then, affordable housing was starting to become an issue. I think that problem remains. Okay, we're seeing, I can speak personally to folks within the county who had to leave or chose to leave because they couldn't find housing. I often use the Centennial School District as an example. I know when we met with them during the comprehensive plan process, they told us about at least one teacher who had a signed contract and then ultimately backed out because they could not find housing in Bucks County. And I think the representative hit it right on the head, which is we are somewhat at odds with our municipalities because they don't want to be told how to solve the problem. They want to be able to do it on their own. And they often will say to us, we don't control the land values, which may be true, but they do control the zoning. And one of the biggest challenges that we have in Bucks County is that over 60% of our county is zoned for single-family residential homes. So when you start to look at on a municipality by municipality basis, and that's one of the things the dashboard will allow you to do, is you start to see that we have devoted so much land to single-family homes that we've only created small pockets for the other types of housing that we often would encourage or would like to see that would help solve this problem.
Right.
And I just also wanted to throw in, again, on a personal note, my daughter lives in Levittown. She was a former police officer in Bristol Township. She bought her house in, I think it was January of 2018 and paid, I think, like $235,000. She could probably sell that home today for close to $500,000. So, those are the two truths that we have to deal with. It's great if you're the current homeowner and you're realizing that gain on your property as an investment, that's terrific. But somebody who was in her situation on a new cop salary coming in can no longer afford that Levittown home. And we used to call those areas NOAH, or naturally occurring affordable housing, right? I'm sure some of you have heard that term. Those pockets of NOAH are getting smaller and smaller. My son bought a townhome in Ben Salem, and at the time, two and a half years ago, he paid, I think, $270,000, and that was he bid over what they were asking. And the only way that he could even get into that house was if my wife and we initially went in with him as a cash deal, because every offer he put in was beat by a cash offer with no inspections, et cetera, et cetera. You all know that tale. But anyway, some insights.
Yeah, I have a similar daughter experience. Our oldest daughter bought a house in 2018, great price, Lidditz, Pennsylvania, and Lancaster County. It's probably doubled in value. Our youngest daughter lives in Philadelphia, and her husband can't afford to buy a house right now because of just what you described. So Representative Prokopiak, going back to talking about, the diversity of Bucks County, there's such a mix of urban, suburban, rural communities. How do you think your legislation would play out on the ground? In other words, how might HB 529 support municipalities that differ widely in size, character, and development pressure?
Well, I think the reason that, sort of because it is an optional situation, if it were to pass, it would be an optional situation, which means each municipality would have the ability to opt into it and then file for, if they chose to do the zoning, which again, even if they opted in, doesn't mean that they're going to do any zoning districts of that. And then they would choose to do the zoning district and then seek the ability to get compensation for that. So I think it allows those local officials that are elected and voted in to make those determinations. And so it's going to be different in every municipality. Some municipalities will say, "Oh, I'll never do it. We don't need any more housing." And ultimately, that's why we have local elections, for those decisions. But I think that as we see more and more issues cropping up, obviously, every municipality, it needs the services that they provide, public works workers, police officers, and those types of things. This housing crisis for those people who are not millionaires, and as we see in Bucks County, all of the houses that we see, if you drive up, along the Newtown bypass, the new homes that were built there were from the 1 millions. We see Toll Brothers building $1 million houses, in Newtown and those places, and those types of things. Those aren't available to the people that we need to do the jobs that we're looking for. One of the things we always talk about with PennDOT is that PennDOT workers are paid the same rate here and in Susquehanna County and in Venango County out west and that type of stuff. So in the Southeast, we have real issues getting PennDOT workers here to fix our potholes and do those road work. So we always have vacancies at PennDOT. And many times what happens is those people then leave PennDOT and go get jobs at local municipalities that pay more. And again, so we're seeing that situation that affects a lot of different things. It affects, certainly teachers and getting teachers into these locations. It affects us getting police officers, because if you can't, no one wants to, many of our municipalities put in restrictions on how far a police officer can live from the job and getting it. And if it's a 12-mile radius, if you're in Central Bucks, a 12-mile radius probably isn't getting you a house you can afford. And it's not just about housing, it's also about rental prices. Because obviously rental, because not everyone wants to buy, but our rental rates are through the roof as well. And so they go hand in hand. So it's, I think it's only, 529 is not going to solve every problem. My other bills that deal with attainable housing and trying to impact, reduce the cost aren't going to solve it all. But we have to start somewhere, and we have to start getting a conversation. And I think 529 would allow us to have conversations with municipalities, with township managers, with borough managers, with zoning hearing boards, and with elected officials saying, hey, you know, this is a problem. It affects all of us. And it's a tool that would help move the ball forward. And that's really what we're looking for. So I think ultimately, you know, some people won't participate in it if it is passed. I think some will.
Great. Thanks, Representative. Evan, turning back to you, are there any local municipalities already taking steps to expand attainable housing? If so, what lessons could others take from their approach?
Yeah, great question. And the answer is yes. Some things that I am aware of, I can't really speak to because they're not yet public, but we have knowledge of that things are working. But the one example I can point to is Middletown Township. Middletown, for instance, when they did their comprehensive plan, I think it was 5 years ago now, they were one of the first municipalities to adopt what they called an implementable comprehensive plan. And part of that comprehensive plan spoke specifically to the issue of housing affordability. They specifically wrote in, for instance, low-income housing tax credit projects as a solution. They talked about utilizing twins homes as a potential solution to housing affordability. They also recognized that they needed to think more or differently about underperforming retail centers. If you look at the Oxford Valley Mall now, we have 600 apartments going in from Cornerstone Tracy. So they amended their zoning to allow for that. But most recently, we were able to get involved at the right time, purely through serendipity, in which we were able to work with Middletown Township, work with a developer, work with Habitat, and work with our staff to help craft an ordinance in which they allowed townhomes to be added or built in their professional district. And as part of that zoning rewrite, we built in an attainable housing incentive. So of the 36 homes that are going to be built on the site, 6 of them will be set aside for lower income folks. And I believe that and Habitat will be used as the third party to do the income verifications. And then those properties will go into the Habitat Land Trust, which means they will be attainable and affordable in perpetuity. They will always have to be sold to someone who meets the definition and the qualifications. And I believe what we have in that case is 2 homes were set aside for those at 60% of AMI, 2 homes were at 80%, and I think 2 homes at 100% of AMI. And one of the things that we were very specific about was that crafting the language of the ordinance in such a way that you won't be able to tell which homes are the affordable homes, if you will, and that all the exterior appearances are the same. And this is also a unique case in which the developer is actually going to build the units versus Habitat. Typically, they have their sweat equity and future homeowners contribute in the build. So, but the builder in this case will build the homes, and I think Habitat's going to work on some of the interior finishing so they can still get their sweat equity. But we think that is a really great introductory model. And something like that coupled with 529, if it's successful, would be terrific. But we think Middletown is one of the municipalities that is leading the way so far.
So having read 529, Representative and Evan, I think what it addresses, we've been hearing a lot about this, missing middle housing. This is the kind of smart, smaller scale, multi-unit housing types like duplexes, triplexes, cottage clutters. Evan, can you talk a little bit about what that means, that missing middle housing, what we're missing, and how that might fit into 529, how it might help there, and how it might fit into the Bucks County landscape?
Sure. Missing middle housing, when I think about it, I can actually go back to my career in the private sector as a landscape architect. We were talking about missing middle housing 15, 16 years ago. And really what it speaks to is when you look at the landscape of housing units that are typically built in Bucks County, what we see are singles, townhomes, and apartments. We see very limited development of twins, quads, and the only time we usually see quads is if they're in age qualified communities, right? Manor homes, stacked townhomes. It really refers to that category of housing unit that is generally a little bit smaller in its footprint, smaller in its size, and generally as a result can be sold at a lower price and becomes more affordable or attainable. Not always the case, because I've heard that argument a lot too. You know, if you were to rezone single family to allow for townhomes, the land costs what the land costs, so you still wind up with 10 townhomes, but they're still going to cost $1 million a piece, right? But we still think that the missing middle component is something that could be encouraged. And then, you know, coupled with, again, 529 in the right district, in the right location, it could lead to, you know, allowing for things like more twins in a single family district, or even accessory dwelling units is another, you know, form of missing middle housing. You know, the carriage homes in some of our older boroughs that have, you know, rear detached garages that often had living space above them, those could become accessory dwelling units. We could allow for the construction of accessory dwelling units on single family lots. Those are just some examples of the missing middle equation.
Representative, is that really, you know, talking about that type of housing, is that what you had in mind when you wrote this legislation? And have you had a chance to talk to municipalities to get any of their input about the bill?
Well, certainly, I mean, part of the bill contains that, you know, certainly greater density that's usually required, more units, that type of stuff. So, you know, because we are talking about here, you know, when we look at most of the help that is out there, you know, whether it be through housing authorities and that type of stuff, they're really limited to low income housing, which, you know, is generally considered 75% or less of AGI. Well, in Bucks County, means you have to a household income of $84,000 is at that limit. So we're not, you know, and that 20 years ago made sense, but it doesn't make sense anymore. And so that, you know, so we're sitting there saying, how do we provide the stock? You know, if you're a police officer, you know, I believe that in many of our communities, certainly in, you know, Warrington, a Warrensburg, I believe those, you know, I've seen advertisements. I mean, they're starting at 70,000 and they get overtime. And so, you know, you're a year in, you're above that 75% of AGI in Bucks County. And that's if you're just a one income household, but that's not going to get you in a house. You know, and certainly our young professionals may not need all that space. So certainly a twin, a duplex would make sense for them. Ultimately, we have to let those local officials make those decisions. And I had conversations with the Boroughs Association and the Township Supervisors Association. They've given feedback on the bill. And, you know, obviously they're not always thrilled about, you know, what they consider any mandate. And the reason that you know, that they don't have an objection is because it is an optional thing. So it's trying to provide that carrot approach. And we do, you know, and I think there are supervisors, especially in the Southeast and borough people, that understand that the continued health of their communities are dependent on having that influx of young people. They are taking the place of the older people. Because, you know, in Pennsylvania and even here in Bucks County, we're seeing a graying of the population. And if we don't get those people here, you know, we're not going to have the services that people are going to need as they grow older. And, you know, when we're talking nurses at our hospitals, we're talking, you know, police officers and EMS employees and volunteer firefighters, and as many of our townships go to paid fire departments, paid firefighters. All of those things are something that, frankly, an older community needs more of, not less of. And so I think, you know, we're starting to get that conversation that many of our local officials understand in order to do their job, they need to have more young people and middle-aged people living in their communities.
So Evan, I'm sure a lot of realtors on this Zoom now understand how expensive it is to build new housing in Pennsylvania. Maybe they're not aware that we are the second highest cost, in the country to build new housing based on the construction costs, all of the zoning issues, the legal costs of trying to work with municipalities to build a new development. So can you talk a little bit more about the kinds of zoning reforms that would help developers build the housing that we need, at these pricing points? And talk a little bit about how the Planning Commission is engaging, both the public and local officials around these challenges.
Sure. Well, I think that one part to that answer is, our housing dashboard and our experience, is one way in which we reach out. In addition to our direct conversations, Middletown Township, as I said, to me, is a model of how, particularly when developers come in and they need zoning relief to do a particular project, whether it's housing related or not, that's really a good opportunity for the Planning Commission to be involved, to help talk about some of these larger priorities and goals, particularly around our Bucks 2040 vision plan, and just what we know anecdotally to be true about the housing situation. So if we are involved early enough, I think we can make a difference. The types of zoning changes that I think are going to help are to think differently. The representative brings a great point, which is, zoning doesn't evolve as quickly as it should in regards to how our society and how our world changes, right? We've all seen monumental changes, and zoning becomes very rigid. And so thinking more about things like mixed use developments, have commercial with residential, thinking about, including ADUs and not restricting them only to family members, thinking about allowing for a greater inclusion of housing types in your housing mix. I live in Plumstead. I often use our community as a good example. We have 3 types of homes in our community. We have what we call a courtyard townhome. They don't have garages. They're basically in the shape of a donut, and they all share parking lots, and they all share a common backyard patio area. We then have traditional townhouses, and then we have single family homes. So we have 3 entry points, if you will, to the community and to the township. And even here, I'm seeing the values shift skyward, right? They're all going up, which is, again, great investment. But it makes it, again, difficult for young folks to come in. And I really can't underscore that enough, that notion of being able to turn properties over to allow for young families to come in. We see it in school districts with declines in enrollment in certain areas. So it's a multi-factored approach.
Yeah, we use the term filtering, which I know you're aware of as well, and that's something that's just not happening right now. My wife and I would love to downsize. Our girls are both out; they've got their own lives and homes now, and there's nothing that we can really transition to at an affordable price. And the fact that we have a pretty good interest rate, that's hard to give up as well. So that's a whole different discussion, how the interest rates are playing a role in all of this. Representative, getting back to HB 529, and what kind of feedback? I mean, we look at the state, and this is one of your challenges. You've got legislators from every walk of life, and certainly every kind of geography. And the geography in the middle of the state could not be different from what we're living in now, where we live. And so what kind of feedback have you gotten from your colleagues in Harrisburg, and what do you think the path forward is for the legislation, in this session?
It's certainly, we do have 14 co-sponsors on this bill. So in there from various places across the state, many from the Southeast, but also some from the central part of the state. And frankly, as we look at even the capital area, Harrisburg, Cumberland County, that type of area, those prices have been rising pretty significantly too. So certainly in suburban areas, this is something that's not just a Southeast problem. We are seeing it in other parts of the state as well. So I ultimately, legislation in Pennsylvania is difficult to pass anything at this point, and I think the House passed over 400 bills last year, sent them to the Senate, and just over 100 were actually acted upon. And we haven't really seen anything in terms of zoning reform or housing reform really acted on by the Senate at this point. So, but that doesn't mean that there won't be. Right now, certainly the budget has taken center stage for everything, and we're not really seeing movement on a lot of other bills. And since we have a late budget, obviously that has impacted many, many bills that are out there. But I do think that it is not a mandate, which I think is something that is important. It's something as an optional program. And it allows each community to make that determination for themselves. I think that's the best avenue for success at this point, because my discussions with the boroughs and with the townships, and with the architects, certainly having that optionality is something that I think makes it much more likely that it can move forward than some of the other bills that we saw, which were mandates, which created certainly local pushback. And we have 203 House seats, we have 50 Senate seats. They encompass different parts of our communities, different parts of our state, rural, urban, exurbs, you name it, we've got it. And so it's something that I think allows municipalities to make those decisions for themselves is probably the best route.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to keep our fingers crossed that we see some movement on the budget, number one, but also on your legislation. So Evan, looking ahead, what do you see as the most realistic opportunities for making real progress on this issue in the next 1 to 3 years?
Yeah, I think the first thing is meetings and sessions like this. I think continuing the conversation, it's one of the things that we stress with our planning documents is that, the exercise doesn't end when you produce the document. So I think this is one of those issues that's going to require ongoing conversation and collaboration between our legislators and our municipal leaders to craft workable solutions. And I think the representative is spot on with, small incremental changes that don't threaten their sense of control are going to be more successful. And hopefully, as we continue to educate and can lean on examples like in Middletown and in other areas that we're seeing to emerge, we can present them as workable examples to try to take some of the fear out of this question about, because when you start saying increased density, people's heads explode in certain communities. But you need to have that kind of density because it not only helps to build a better community, it helps to create more flow for your business, it helps to diversify your income in your municipality, and get younger folks in because we are skewing older. And that's where we're at.
Yeah, I think, I've been trying to figure out what story do we tell to convince people that this is, a personal issue to them. And one that I think of for, myself and probably a lot of others is just family. Do you want your sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters, living near you? Is that important to you? Because this issue is for you, if that's a yes. And, thinking of all the other young families that, don't have the same opportunity that we had. It's tough. It's tough. So I hope we see this legislation move forward. I know it's going to spark some discussion, which we need more of. And I think we're just going to have to keep our heads down and moving forward and educating as many people as possible to get this thing moving. At that point, I want to just go to the audience, and Pete, If you can check out the chat and see if there are any audience questions that we can share with our guests.
Yes, Jamie, we've had some interesting and good questions and comments coming in. Susan asked, while Evan was speaking about the example in Middletown of affordable housing being written into the ordinance, she was wondering, are those affordable units available to residents based on employment, like our teachers, police officers, et cetera, given any special consideration, or is it based solely on income?
I believe it's solely on income, and with the understanding that those income levels probably encompass those professionals that you're talking about.
Gotcha. Uh, Frank, who opened the meeting, the webinar today, had a question also for Evan. He said that a lot of developers see this as a zoning issue more than a workforce housing issue, and he was wondering what steps are possible to take existing vacant office buildings or commercial properties and turn them into multifamily or assisted living or memory care type units.
Great question. I think, sure, the opportunity is there and we're only restricted by our imagination and then ultimately the zoning at the local level. And so I think, yes, there are opportunities to think about how those areas are zoned, how those buildings are being utilized. I'm sure the developers will tell you that it's probably more costly to retrofit some of those buildings based on the way they're constructed. I can give you an example. In Warrington, there's Valley Square, which is a shopping area that had retail on the first floor and offices on the second floor. And they've seen high vacancy rates in those office suites because the office market has been on life support for quite some time in the county. And so we approached them about redeveloping those upper floors as residential units. And we began to understand that because of the way they were constructed, there becomes issues with noise and fire and plumbing and et cetera. So it's difficult, but not impossible to retrofit some of those buildings. But I think that's the kind of thinking and the conversations that we have to have is about how do we envision things differently than what they are today. And just because it's this use today doesn't mean it can't be something else tomorrow. And that's, again, getting our municipal officials comfortable with that idea of being able to change zoning. One of the other things that I think has to change, and Representative Prokopiak touched on this, is some of the inherent land development costs. I went to a legislative breakfast on the state of building and from the Home Builders Association. And one of the figures that they threw out, which I thought was staggering, was that on average now developers, it costs them roughly $50,000 per lot for stormwater management when they're doing a development. So when you start to look at those costs, too, that's something else where I think we have opportunity to help fine tune the system, maybe lower escrow fees perhaps, and find ways to further incentivize or at least remove obstacles besides just the zoning to the development of new housing. And the land development process itself can take a lot of time. And so developers don't like to spend time because it costs money in consultant fees and attorney fees to go through the process. So if there's ways that we can fine tune the land development process, that too would be helpful. And I believe there may have been legislation introduced on that front as well.
I have a question from Joe that would be for Representative Prokopiak. Does Bill 529 do anything to incent municipalities to identify, rezone, and revitalize obvious community eyesores, distressed and/or underutilized properties?
Certainly, I think that would be part of one of the things that really would be targeted by local officials. It doesn't limit it just to those, but I think obviously those would be, I think, the starting point for many municipalities in looking at those things that are being underutilized, certainly brownfield sites, all those types of things. Certainly, I think that's the intent, but it gives them the leeway to make that decision on their own.
Okay, there's a few comments that I'll just pass along. Donna said that she was hoping to bring attention to some of the issues with the Bucks County down payment and closing cost assistance programs, that there are several reasons that the program is almost unusable, and that's something that maybe should be addressed with 529. There was also a comment about the cost of 55 plus units, that the last over 55 unit was $900,000, not including taxes and condo fees. And then a comment just now from Hannah, just saying that she's so happy that everybody is working on this and thanking us for this.
Terrific. All right. Well, I think that is just about a wrap. This has been a great conversation. I think I've learned a lot. I think we've all learned a lot. I would just ask Representative or Evan if you have any parting thoughts that you would like to leave with the group before we sign out.
The one thing I would say is part of it was a discussion at my policy hearing in September on attainable housing is that, obviously, and Jamie, you touched about on it, part of it is education, and education of elected officials, education of our neighbors, education of your home buyers and your sellers, that this is a problem. And only by people recognizing that there is this problem and we publicizing that there is this problem, that we can get to solutions. And I think that's part of where I don't think people really think about it, because they're concerned about their own lives. They're concerned about, oh, well, I'm in my house, so I'm good. And as Jamie said, but their kids can't find a house. And maybe they're like, well, I'd like my kids to move out at some point, but there's no place for them to move. And that's really where we hear a lot of this is those people who have parents, kids who are getting of the age where they should be moving on and starting their life independently, and they can't. So part of that is the education, and it certainly as realtors, you deal with the public on an everyday basis. And part of that is, an education to those people of your experiences with buyers and who can't find a house. Because ultimately, the only way we change things is by acknowledging the problem, getting that information out to people, and then people will start looking for solutions.
Perfect. Evan?
No, I think that encapsulates it really well. And Jamie, just to touch on something you said, I have been saying for a couple of years now, part of the opportunity here is to put a face on this. And it's organizations like yours, and I think our elected officials need to hear from our business community more. Oftentimes when a development comes in and the NIMBYs show up at a meeting, there's nobody there talking for the project. And so we need folks to come out and say, wait a minute, okay, I think there could be compromise here, but here's why we need more housing, and we need it to be right, because I'm a business owner, I can't find employees. They have to drive an hour to get to me. They're not going to do that. So if we can put a face on this, and I think the other point is, I think one of the things, our goals is to be able to put a financial cost on this. There's a social cost, but I think there's also a financial cost to many of our municipalities if they don't start to think about this in different ways.
Yeah. Terrific. Well, listen, thank you both for sharing all of your insights and your time today. It's clear that solving the housing challenges we're facing in the region will require, I think, coordination at every level, from the capital to the county to our individual municipalities. So I will say to our audience, if you'd like to learn more about House Bill 529 or the Bucks County Planning Commission's ongoing work, we'll be sharing links and resources in our news next Friday. And the session, as I said, will be out. If you want to share this webinar with friends who are interested in the issue, we would encourage that. I believe it'll be on the Bucks County YouTube channel. So thanks again to Representative Jim Prokopiak and Evan Stone. And thanks to all of you for joining us and being part of this, I think, really important conversation. Have a great day and a great weekend.